welcome everybody to this session, No Mind Left Behind in the Community. I'm Joe Long from Scottish Autism. I'm going to be chairing this discussion, and I'm going to ask my fellow panel members to introduce themselves one by one, starting on my right.
Hi, I'm Frank McKillop. I'm the Head of Policy and Communications at Enable, which is a Scottish charity that supports people who have a learning disability with social care provision, employability support and community-based projects.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. I'm Dr. Punit Shah and I'm Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Bath.
Venessa.
Hello, I'm Venessa Bobb. I'm a mother with 3 neurodivergent young autistic adults with ADHD and autism, and I'm a grandmother, and I've been diagnosed with autism as well.
Hi, I'm Nanny. I'm an autistic blogger for Autistic Village, but I'm also a volunteer for Spectrum Gaming, and I've done an awful lot of work with them, so that's why I'm on the panel today.
Thanks everybody for those great introductions. No mind left behind in the community. We use community in lots of ways, don't we, in our service speak, in our discussions. We talk about the community as though it's something out there that we all belong to. We talk about populations, neurodivergent populations as communities. We talk about community as a sense of belonging. So I thought, given all these different meanings of community, I would start by asking the panel members, what does community mean to you and your organisation? Shall we start with Nanny?
Okay, well, I mean, for me, community is a safe space, understanding, acceptance, where we can connect with others. But, I mean, a lot of people then think that, oh, let's all join in a circle and sing rainbows and dance with unicorns. And it's not that either. It's listening to people, giving them space and grace to be themselves and to explain their experience and be heard and be seen. And, again, for Spectrum Gaming, that's exactly the same ethos, which is why Andy and I get along so well together.
Venessa.
Okay. Community, for me, I think sits a bit different with me because Nathaniel, who's my middle child, was diagnosed with autism and ADHD at 5. He's 20 now, and I could say that I had to remove myself from everybody because I didn't think nobody believed that my son was autistic. And then in the end, I formed my own community, and that was by linking up with autistic people and organisations that could understand my child's needs. But when it came to me as a black autistic, at the time a black mother with a young family, I just felt that nobody was listening to me. So I had to set up a second voice in regards to connecting with people who understood what I was going through, and that's what what community means to me.
Thanks, Venessa. Punit, where does community figure in the sort of more clinical and research settings in which you work?
Okay, so community for me is, I'll start with some controversy or an unconventional view. I think I see it as a confusing and interesting concept. So for academics, and some of my colleagues would disagree, community doesn't accurately represent the fact that there are often various communities of academics working together. So for me, I see community, the best way I can see it is a sort of umbrella term that has various communities underlying it, often with people working on slightly different topics. And the challenge for us as a research community, if you like, is in having those individual communities doing work that they're expert in, but at the same time having mechanisms to bring those sub-communities, if you like, together to try and develop and achieve shared goals. But that's tricky.
We'll perhaps get into some of the challenges and benefits of that in a bit in the discussion. Frank, social care services we often talk about as being in the community, but there are other aspects of community to those services and those organisations, aren't there?
Yes, absolutely. And I think at Enable we recognise there's a community of interest for people who have a learning disability. They will often have shared life experiences. And we do always encourage local groups of people who have a learning disability or their parents and carers to come together to share those experiences. I think there's a great strength in that, and it becomes a community of campaigning. It's a big part of Enable's work is trying to change the country. It's work, as you know, Joe, that Scottish Autism and National Autistic Society have done along with Enable to try and change the law, to make Scotland's law more supportive environment for people who have a learning disability or autism or neurodiversity. So I think there's that element of a community of interest, but I think a big part of Enable's campaigning is about an inclusive society. And I think, you know, that sometimes that feels like, well, of course you're for an inclusive society, that's quite boring and straightforward, but it's actually quite a new idea. It is only 23 years ago, people in Scotland were still routinely sent to institutional settings. They would live their whole lives in hospitals because they had a learning disability. It's only since the year 2000 that Scottish Government policy has moved away from that to living and supporting people within the community. So I think it's sometimes that idea of including people in the wider community is a bit more radical and a bit more new than we sometimes think, and it's perhaps obvious that it's not fully embedded yet.
Thanks for that, Frank. Thank you. So I suppose I want to get on a bit to the how. You talked about safe spaces as being really important, Nanny. How do you create those safe spaces? What do you think are crucial to providing that nurturing environment?
Oh, I mean, for me, the nurturing, I mean, with Spectrum Gaming, we started off being actually an exclusive community. We didn't want the neuromajority anywhere near us. We wanted an autistic-only space. People who spoke the same language as us, people who we understood. And then, of course, we realised that, you know, despite their struggles, the neuromajority do have some useful skills once in a while. And, you know, it's nice to exploit them. Sorry, I'm joking, but, you know, we do hear this about autistics all the time. And so, yeah, when we did get neurotypicals joining the crew, we had to train them. We had to do communication guides to explain that you don't ask an autistic, how are you, when you're doing a work communication, because we're now panicking, because we know if you're asking, how are you, you don't actually want to know the answer. What you want to know is, I want to ask you a favour, and I'm testing the water, and now we're panicking about what the favour's going to be. Yeah, stop the panic, just ask the favour. Tell us what we want. You know, tell us what you want from us, and we can tell you straight up yes or no. And we don't have to do the anticipation thing. And, you know, with young people, again, very clear guidelines without setting them up for failure. So, you know, we have an explosive world on Spectrum Gaming where you can go, you know, you've had a bad day. There's just sometimes the only thing that makes you feel better is going to blow up an entire city. And we set that up because otherwise they'll come onto Minecraft, they've had a bad day, and they'll blow up somebody's base, and that's going to upset people. So we accommodate for that. We understand how people work, we understand what the needs are, and we understand because we ask. And the young people tell us, and they say, we need this, we need that, this is how it's going to work. And because we listen and because we adapt to that, it's a safe space.
Thank you. Vanessa, what's been key to, you know, for a second voice in creating a kind of supportive, inclusive space, do you think?
I think for me, it's about making sure that everybody's listened to. I don't just focus on the autistic child or adult, I focus on family, because I know my lived experience was everybody focused on my middle child, which ended up affecting the siblings. Again, the youngest one got diagnosed 10 years later. So I feel it's so important that support groups, SEND groups. I don't like the word SEND because I think what's happened is that word SEND's become a buzzword and everybody seems to think that they can treat autistic people exactly the same. So I feel that I need to be in a safe space that everybody in my organisation either work with autistic people or somebody knows somebody who's autistic. I can't just have anybody. It's about trust. It's about making sure that we provide a provision where everything I do is linked to gaming, because I know I've seen how it's made my son feel included, especially families who don't want their children to do these games. I've seen how it's built a safe space, so when they come together, even though they may not be talking together, they're working alongside, and then the siblings come along, and then what happens is we can actually talk to each other. And if a child is acting inappropriately, nobody's saying, can you remove your child? We're actually helping together, especially if they've got a young child in the family. So that's what I see as safe space. Everybody coming together and not just looking at the child only.
I understand. It's really striking to me how often in service language we talk about service delivery, provision, practice, but actually when we talk about community, we start to hear words like trust, safety, and I think that's part of what we need to tease out, I think, in the kind of wider service landscape, isn't it? This kind of qualitative understandings of what it means to be in a safe space or to be included. Punit, how do we do that in the sort of more research or clinical spaces? How do we create those places of safety in those contexts?
It's a really good question, and I think there are strong parallels to the research community and what Venessa talks about. It's the same sorts of guiding principles that we need to adopt surrounding sort of trust, trying to find a shared language, trying to find ways in which that we can not just tolerate but actually respect diverse viewpoints. And that's challenging and increasingly challenging in academia. There are great opportunities as we learn more and more about autism and neurodiversity, and as we have a wider pool of people involved in the research. I think we're going to make quicker progress, but as part of that progress, we need to develop mechanisms to consult, to engage, to co-produce research with neurodivergent people, and creating that safe space, creating that space is still a work in progress. And I think it will constantly need to be a work in progress. And that's by definition what we need to be doing, using the research that we do, not just to do the research and understanding the phenomena we're interested in, but also using the same methods to develop the spaces in academic arenas, but also more generally in society.
Thank you. Frank, it's really notable when I engage with Enable how sort of member-led it is, how much sort of community lead the organisation. How have you gone about building those sort of spaces and forums where that can happen effectively?
I think it is a big part of what we're all about, and again, it's sort of the history of charities as they develop. When Enable was established back in 1954, and nearly 70 years ago, it was very much parents of children who had a learning disability, and that's essentially what the charity was for. And over the next 4 decades, we progressed to a place by the early 90s where we adopted the name Enable, where it was then being led by the people who have a learning disability themselves. It had gone away from that sort of paternalistic approach to we will look after people with learning disabilities, and it got to a place where it was people with learning disabilities themselves who led that. That's facilitated across the country. There are local branches that are active, run by volunteers, and local groups that are established for people with a learning disability in that area to raise local issues that are of concern to them, and campaigning on that basis with local councillors and local authorities, but also some of those national issues, things that need to change nationally. And I think in terms of inclusion, we essentially have 2 strands of an inclusive society, and one strand is supporting people who have a learning disability to be more involved in their community. But perhaps the more ambitious one is to try and change society itself, and that's that national campaigning that we do. It's not okay that you expect people with a learning disability to adapt to a society that isn't designed for them. The important thing is that we have workplaces, we have schools, and we have all sorts of things in our communities and in our society that are making the adaptations themselves to recognise that they need to be more inclusive and the changes that they need to make. So that is the sort of strand. And again, I think exactly as other speakers have said, it's being led by people who have that experience. They know what they're talking about, they know what they're looking for, and that's what gives the strength, I think, to some of the campaigns that charities like ours and others have.
Thanks very much. We've talked a bit about some of the kind of crucial elements to creating those inclusive spaces, but there are always challenges and lessons learned along the way. So I wonder if I can ask us to reflect on some of those a little bit. Nanny, did you have any particular
Well, yeah, we've got several challenges. I mean, one is that a lot of young people joining Spectrum Gaming expect instant friendships, which obviously doesn't happen. This is real life, this is people. Some people are compatible, some people aren't. You're also dealing with a lot of trauma. A lot of young autistics, by the time they join us, are severely traumatized. So they're bringing a lot of panic monkey and dino brain to the conversation, which you're dealing with. You've also got people who hate being autistic. All they've heard about autism is it's bad, and all the things they're being blamed for and judged for and hated for are because they're autistic. And so, you know, they're sitting there in this great big pile of poo, and then there's people a bit further down the journey going, oh no, autism is great. And they're going, yeah, it's great about your daisies, I'm in the poo. So don't tell me about that. And then you get conflict because they don't want the two together. And so, you know, we have to very gently move people and work with where they are at, when they're at that place. And, you know, the other thing, of course, we have to deal with is the fact we're in no punishment zone. We use Nest, and, you know, outside world, justice means I take an eye, you take an eye. And so it takes a while for young people to adjust and realize that if you mess up, we will help you work out ways to not mess up again. And we'll do it that way. And so, you know, it takes time of an adjustment to work with that. And finally, of course, is the tech. A lot of parents are scared of it. They've got the Daily Fail who tells them how terrible it is and gaming is addictive, and they don't catch the fact that the only place that some of these young people can socialize is online. So if you restrict someone's socialization to 2 hours a week, that's like putting somebody in solitary confinement for the rest of the week. And trying to explain to parents that that's the situation and trying to move them out of that fear-mongering zone is sometimes a hard thing to do.
Thank you. I just wanted to, you mentioned Nest. Can you tell us a bit about that for those of us that are perhaps not familiar with it?
So with Nest, first of all, you recognize that when somebody has done something, you know, like blown up a Minecraft base, that's not them. That's their autonomic protective response, their dino brain. And you can't talk to dino brain. Dino brain doesn't do dialogue. You've got to nurture them first, help them feel safe. Give them space to calm down, give them time to deal with their emotions and process them and get them through. Then the next thing is you empathize with them, you listen. You don't come with any opinions, you don't come with your point of view, you hear their side, you hear their point of view and hear all of it, and give them the space to talk. And then, and only then, do you share other perspectives and say, do you understand that when you blew up that base, I understand you were really mad at Bob, but do you understand how terrible Bob feels now and how Bob doesn't feel safe going back onto Minecraft? And how are we going to do as a team to fix this situation? How are we going to fix the situation? How are we going to work forward? You know, can you feel when you start? Can you start to feel when Panic Monkey is starting to bounce? Can you feel when Panic Monkey is going to start to get Dino Brain involved? If you can feel that, what else could you do? Could you go and have a cup of tea? Could you go and punch a pillow? Could you go and swear at the top of your voice in your room? And, you know, ways to walk away from the keyboard until Dino Brain is settled. And we do it as teamwork because sometimes it takes a parent to go, ooh, yes, you're getting a bit agitated here. I think you need a break. And it needs someone else. Sometimes we will do a temporary ban because they will not be able to walk away from the keyboard. Dino Brain's in charge. They can't do it. So we take them off, and they know we're taking them off as teamwork just to give them time to calm down. And as soon as they've calmed, they'll get access back up again. And you know, you don't put it all on the child. You don't say, well, you need to learn how to do this. We will work with you to figure out strategies, figure out tools, figure out a way to get around this.
That's a great explanation. Thank you for that. Vanessa, what challenges have you faced in sort of creating those inclusive spaces?
I think creating spaces, I feel, is not seeing somebody that looks like me. Nobody listening to me. Like you look today now, it's quite empty. And I think it's a bit embarrassing in many ways because there's spaces where if families have got dual heritage children and certain parents can't speak, how are you going to support those families? So for me, it's about making sure that my voice is heard. My voice was never heard. When I listened to everybody's presentations today, I got triggered quite a lot. But again, how I learned to cope was I just got on with it because I am a survivor to domestic violence and sexual abuse. I wasn't allowed to talk about those things because I was told, just move on. But when I did disclose that, what you found with a lot of social workers, they would use that against me. So I think for any parent, anybody who's autistic, who has gone through childhood trauma, is making sure that, again, it's about a safe space that if we can speak and share our childhood traumas, that it's not going to be used on us, how we parent our children. So my thing is, professionals need to understand, yes, it is about the autism, but if that young person, like when we heard Holly speak, and I think the others speak about girls and women, I could see that was me in many ways, and I looked at my children, and it made me feel that sometimes I felt like I was an imposter because I wasn't allowed to speak. But I think speaking today is that these spaces need to be that everybody talks about inclusion. They need to make sure that our voices are heard, because at the end of the day, you can't say we're all included when we don't see people like me, because I understand there's multiple of layers, that I can only go to certain communities to get this help, but when it comes to the autistic community, I've had to rely on organisations like At Autism or Anna Freud or Dr. Ken Greaves who supported me. There's lots of people I could go to, but at the same time, it's about making sure that I know when I'm going to somebody, it's not a dead end. And I think that's what a lot of families are feeling, is that, again, a lot of Black and Asian dual heritage families don't sometimes feel their voices are being heard, because you can't speak for everybody, and I can only speak from my lived experience.
Thanks very much. And when we were chatting about this session yesterday, we talked about the intersectionality word that we hear a lot, that the kind of fact we have intersecting identities, memberships of communities, diagnoses, membership of different sort of marginalised groups at play often. And how have you sort of negotiated that in the spaces that you're in? You've just touched on them there, but...
Okay, I can say for the last 10 years I've spoke about pregnancies, because my oldest daughter ran away at 14, nobody listened to me. I had to deliver my grandson at home, so again, I've had to just make sure that everything that I've had, that lived experience, that I go out, I go to places, I've got to ask professionals, what can I do? But again, it's always about the fact that there's always, like, when people leave today, what are they going to do? I can say that I've come to so many conferences and I don't see progress, I just see talking, I just see lip service sometimes. So I've become to the point that I don't want to be the tokenism that everybody knows Venessa Bobb, because I've had to step back to make sure that the next generation can come and speak. But I just feel sometimes I'm just put in a place just to tick a box, and then sometimes I walk away. I do see progress slowly, but it's not out there in the community. And I think this conference, I believe that has done great things, because I sat here and I was whispering to Dr. Ken Greaves and I was saying, oh my gosh, I remember I was saying this for the last 10 years. So it shows there are people that have got the same vision, but we need to come together. We shouldn't have to just leave it here and wait another year. We should know who do we go to, who do we trust? It's that word about trust. And to make sure it's not just ticking the box, close the door and wait again, because there's a lot of young women, young men, and again, I'm going to say it as it is, a lot of the communities, certain Black and Asian communities don't want to talk about trans. I've had trans families that have come to me and need support. It may not be in my area, but I need to know who I can signpost, because you can't shut the door, because that's where mental health, for me, for a lot of autistic communities, are being failed again within the Black and Asian community as well. And I hope that's answered my question.
Very emphatically, thank you, Venessa. And, taking on what Venessa said about being heard and voices being heard, in research we face all these kind of intersecting marginalisations, and whether it's neurodivergences, gender identification, ethnicity. How do we ensure that everyone's voice is heard in research, Punit?
Yeah, it's a really good question and a difficult one to tackle, because we're all, I think, moving in the same direction, or trying to move in the direction where we do have a more inclusive, representative form of academic scholarship and science, where we're trying to ensure that there is that appropriate representation. Now that's challenging, because in an ideal world, sort of scientifically, you'd want to ask everyone in the population, or the population of interest, or across the population. Now, doing that is achievable in certain countries in the world. We take these very large population-based approaches, as they're called, to trying to study things that we're interested in and trying to include people in the research. But in doing so, that often means that you can't use the research methods that allow you to get the sort of richness of information that it might be possible on a sort of smaller scale, where you're able to tap into and understand lived experience at a deeper level. So for us as academics, as scientists, we're trying to find ways and new mechanisms. Online approaches are going to be really crucial to this end, in trying to find ways to collect that richness of data, to draw on those experiences on a larger scale, from an appropriately large and representative group of the population. And in doing so, we then hope, or at least in theory, will be able to design support structures, think about doing research in a way which will have the maximum benefit for the largest number of people.
Thank you. It's an issue for service provision as well, isn't it? Ensuring we sort of reach all the communities and all the people we need to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something that many of us in the social care sector, and I think the charity sector more broadly, have had to really do a bit of soul searching in recent years. I think certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, I think, triggered that in a lot of organisations that had to reflect in a quite challenging way on, are we really doing enough? I think the world is full of good intentions, and I think people sort of pat themselves in the back and say, well, of course, we're nice people, we're doing enough. And I think that was a really good point at which a lot of organisations did really challenge themselves. Are we really inclusive? Are we really reaching into these communities and supporting everyone we should be supporting? So I know at Enable and at other organisations we have taken measures to get better at our recruitment. We've brought in support and consultants to make sure we're actually recruiting people. Our care model is always community-based and people recruit to their own staff. It's essentially a self-directed support model, but the staff are formally employed by Enable, but we give that choice and control to the individual who's accessing care and support. So it's important that they have a pool of candidates that they really want to spend several hours of their week or several hours of their day supporting them, and not just picked from, you know, a slate of candidates that they might always apply for these jobs. We need to do more to make sure that we have more diverse candidates coming forward, so that the people who are accessing support services via Enable and other providers actually can have personal assistance that they can relate to and that can help support them to have a great life in the way that should be just a human right for everybody. And we know we've got to get better at that. You know, there are specialist organisations out there that we've made an effort to engage with and are supporting us to get better at that. And I think probably the starting point for that for a lot of organisations is to admit we don't always get this right and we want to get better at it. And I think those opportunities are there for a lot of organisations to get better.
Agreed. Thank you. We've got a few questions and comments coming in from people in the audience, and please do keep them coming in. Well, a comment here, which I think was in reference to your talking about guidelines, Nanny, which was, someone says, I appreciate that the autistic people are the ones who lack social prowess, I quote, but allistics actually have to be trained to interact with us. I think that speaks to what you were saying, certainly. Another question for you, Nanny. Mark asks, in terms of spectrum gaming, are there any plans for a space for older gamers? And they've been clear to put in brackets, asking for a friend.
Yeah, no. However, if you wish to contact us at Spectrum Gaming, we can tell you the formats that we've used. And if you want to set up your own space, we'd be very happy to support with all the things we've learned on how to do that. But, you know, it takes a lot of work to do the gaming community we've got without adding adults to that.
Thank you. And, you know, I think that speaks to, when we're talking about intersectionality, we have to recognise age is an important, factor as well. Vanessa, a question for you. What inspired you to become a content developer?
Oh, gosh. I think it's an accident, actually. I think because I think during COVID, they were speaking about the disproportionate amount of Black and Asian people that were dying to COVID. And I ended up doing lots of webinars. And it was Anna Freud, and I think it's Dr. I can never say her second name, Dr. Jordan, she knows who she is, asked me would I able to deliver some content. And I did something with NHS England. Again, through that, I was able to bring different communities together, lived experiences, researchers, autistic adults, parents. And through that, I just end up becoming part of Anna Freud and at Autism as a content developer, where I'm looking at ethnicity and culture and looking at the hospital passport. That's how it came about.
Thank you very much. That's a great insight. Question here, how can the different aims and perspectives of neurodivergent people and the parents of neurodivergent people be reconciled? Punit, is that something you face? Is that a tension you face in your work?
I think I would call it a tension and an opportunity, and I think there are various double-edged swords here, and why I say that it's a tension and an opportunity is because where there are these sort of tensions, that's often reflecting something interesting, a reality out there. which is also not uncommon to tensions between parents, you know, non-autistic or neurotypical parents and children, where people have different ambitions and goals depending on where you are in life. In terms of research and how those views feed into research can be tricky. And again, I mean, I've sort of touched on this, and I don't want to sort of be lazy in saying, well, online sorts out everything, but actually one of the ways in which we are starting to make, and really perhaps one of the silver linings, if you like, and maybe there's a better way of putting it, of the pandemic, was that the move towards online approaches has meant that we are able to capture the views and voices of parents, of neurodivergent people at different ages, including not so much children, but certainly adolescents. And it's through gaining that richness of data we can, one, actually see where there is convergence, and actually often there is much more overlap and agreement between what people's priorities are. And with the volume of data we get, we can actually see that more clearly, but it also allows us to sort of disentangle and delineate where there might be competing or slightly different priorities, depending on whether it's parents or different or other support workers, for example, and try and sort of map that out in a way in which then can feed into research in a more sensible and efficacious way.
Thank you. Nanny, I wondered if you wanted to reflect on that because you talked about access to tech as sometimes being an issue. I don't know if it's an issue between parents and young people. How do you reconcile the different views?
Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely an issue. And I mean, one of the big things is that, you know, you hear on the outside world, oh, you know, you've got to get them out into the real world, and, you know, gaming will, you know, we even had ridiculous research recently that gaming causes ADHD. You know, ADHD happens from pre-birth, so I'm not totally sure. You know, we've got gaming fetuses. But we have this lack of knowledge and supposition, and mostly because they're not talking to autistics. And if, you know, we have found at Spectrum Gaming that most of the young people there are choosing to spend time only on gaming and in their rooms because it's not safe to be outside of that space. As soon as they head out in the real world, it's like walking in a social minefield with no map. You don't know when you're going to hit that landmine or how many landmines you're going to hit before you get to the end of the day. And then you've got your sensory overloads and your processing overloads, which nobody's accommodating for. And then when you have a meltdown, it's all your fault, and you're going to end up in detention or exclusion for something that somebody else has done to you. Would you want to go in the outside world? So we need to be, you know, with Spectrum Gaming, we're now starting to do advocacy. We're going out to schools. We're working with parents to teach how to create a healthy, safe environment so it's safe to leave the online world. It's safe to interact face-to-face as well, because online is actually a very safe space. There is clear rules, there's clear guidelines. People know where the landmines are. You've got the map. And you've got, you know, you've got a sense of autonomy. You've got a sense of mastery. This may be the only place in the world where you have any sense of control or safety. And then we're getting parents advised to rip that away from them because gaming isn't good for them and they might get addicted. Well, they're not. You know, you can get addicted to gaming. But for most autistics, that's not what you're seeing. They're not staying there because they're addicted. They're staying there because there's nowhere else to go.
Nanny, we've got a follow-up question for you, which is, are Spectrum Gaming prepared to support autistic parents of autistic kids who aren't gamers but may wish to volunteer for Spectrum Gaming?
Oh, very much so. And, you know, we're very happy to get parents. I mean, particularly we prefer to have autistic parents if we can, because there is nothing like having autistic adults when you're a young person who can say, look, yeah, when I was your age, I went through the same stuff. Here are the tools that I learnt. Here are my workarounds. Some of these may work for you. Some of them may not. But, you know, we get it. We get dino brain. We get panic monkey taking over. we get when communication doesn't make sense. And so, yeah, we're very happy to have parents come in and say, you know, we want to volunteer. We regularly do call-outs and we do training in the nest approach and all of that. So, yeah, if you want to join, we'd be very happy to hear from you.
There we are, a clear answer. Vanessa, do you find a tension sometimes between, you know, the desires or concerns of parents and the young people that you're supporting in your organisation?
I think because, again, as I said, mine is all about family, so I've ended up seeing children started from age of 2 right up to 18, and I've just seen progress. But again, it's always, again, about trust, because some parents, I try to make sure they don't get used to being around me, because I always say to everybody, I'm not going to be on this planet all my life, so we've got to sometimes get them used to going to other spaces, because, again, you find some organisations, they don't want to signpost, but you've got to remember, I can't help everybody. All I can do is have that safe space. They can come and they can speak to autistic people, they can have workshops, they can just be in a safe space. But there's some places that I do need to signpost them to, because as I said, I can't speak for everybody. And sad to say, some people just don't want no one to leave their organisation thinking they're going to lose the funding. Because I'm all about, everything I do is through funding. I volunteer is through funding. And a lot of the time people think that I get paid. I don't. I do this free because I enjoy just seeing change. I like to see children smiling. I like to see siblings coming together to be in the same spaces, because sometimes siblings get pushed aside, and we've got to remember that sometimes siblings end up getting diagnosed in later life. And if they don't get the support now, what happens is they end up under the mental health journey, which has actually happened to my youngest one in particular, because nobody was listening. Again, for me, I never answer the questions as I should, because I know my journey's been like this all the time, because parents just feel they just need to be heard. I think that's what I've got. It's all about being heard, being included. And again, some spaces, they use that word inclusion, and it still doesn't mean included. It's still excluding. Does that make sense?
It does, and it speaks to a question. That was a very clear answer, Vanessa. And you know, that inclusion of the family from day one, you know, is so clearly part of your ethos. We've got a question here which says, what about the commoditisation of accessibility, which I think sort of touches on what you've just said, i.e. How the appearance of inclusion is sometimes more important than actually doing the work. Is that something you've come across?
I've been to places where people say it's included, or is it inclusion, and it doesn't mean inclusion. Because if a child turns around and says they don't want to do gaming, they want to do swimming, the parent may say, no, do gaming. And I just feel, for me, is to make sure that I have spaces that, just because I know, like, my son used to like gaming, I didn't stop him from doing it, because I knew that was his safe space. But then I had to make sure that there was another space for another child that wanted to do something else. People just think they can bunch everybody together and think they've got the same interests. They don't. Autistic people have got different interests. Just because one may like to do maths, as they say, you still have to make sure you've got another avenue. But sadly to say, people think every autistic child wants to be in a sensory space where there's a sensory room, lights and strobing. No. I've seen autistic adults come in my space and say, the reason why I like coming to your space is because there's 3 different rooms doing something different. And I feel that's what organisation needs to understand. Not just the organisation, it's parents need to understand sometimes they have to listen to the autistic child to say, Mum, Dad, whoever, I don't like this. We have to start listening as parents. We can't always assume just because another autistic child is doing something that our children are going to like it. That's how I look at it, sorry.
Thank you for that answer. Frank, same question to you. Commoditisation of accessibility, how do you avoid the appearance of inclusion without doing the work? You know, how do we make sure we do the work?
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, and I think it's something we find especially with the employability projects that we do with workplaces and with employers. I think there's even some of the accreditations that you can get that have sort of fallen apart under a bit of scrutiny when we've actually gone in to support those employers to make their workplace truly inclusive for people with learning disabilities or autistic or neurodiverse. So I think that it's understanding, I think exactly as others have said, it's people with that lived experience supporting that process. It's people coming in and being able to actually share their experience of what truly makes a space inclusive for them. Makes such a difference, because I think we have to recognise, I think perhaps especially in some of these Employers, again, perhaps a consultancy has gone in and told them what to do, but that's not actually informed by the experience of people who have learning disabilities themselves. So I think that's been sort of educational for employers. And again, I think most people do have good intentions, and I think they've been quite affronted sometimes when they realise, when they get a list from us, if we've done a bit of an accessibility audit and give them the list of reasons of why things are not as accessible as they thought they are, even if they've perhaps even got an accreditation that says it is. So I think most are on board with that, and I think that's certainly a great strength where employers recognise that they have to do more, and that's certainly something that we've seen more and more of. But yeah, there's still certainly that barrier that has to be overcome in a lot of places.
Thank you very much. A question for Nanny. Someone's asked that they've heard about toxicity and sexism sometimes in gaming communities. How do you work around that, or how do you avoid that in your organisation?
Well, in our organisation, we have a list of expectations that are laid out day one, which includes that is not acceptable. If somebody does that online, we will take them straight offline and explain to them why it's not okay. We don't allow gender shaming. So again, a lot of young people are exploring their gender, they're exploring their sexuality, and they need to be feeling safe and free to do that without somebody going, oh, you said you were male last week and now you're saying you're female. We just say that is not okay. It's full, and if somebody continues with it, we will pull them offline, explain to them, and we will keep pulling them offline and explaining until they understand that it's not. And we have quite big and frank discussions to explain what's going on and why it isn't. But in the community, we're about 50-50 gender-wise. We've got probably as many girls as we've got guys, and again, we have quite a large trans community.
Thank you. So a question for Venessa. I'm going to put it to Nanny as well. We'll start with Venessa. What do you look for before joining a community to determine if it's a space you can join and have your voice heard in an inclusive way? That's from Andrew. Oh, gosh. What do you look for in an organisation or community?
I Google search the organisation and see their presence to see what they're doing. I don't just go straight in, because sometimes just because somebody says they say what they say doesn't mean they say what they say. And I think for me, I'm a worrier and a thinker, so to protect myself, I just have to make sure I know they have the same understanding, the same, I won't even say belief, because when we all come together, we leave our differences at the outside just to make sure that we can able to just have a safe space just to talk about our differences. Because what I find with a lot of families is that, for me, I go to church, but you've got some parents who just won't talk about their faith community. So again, that's another area when we talk about intersectionality. Some parents, when they come in a space, they can't speak because they've been told they're not allowed to. I make sure that organisations are there, that I know if somebody comes to talk to me, I'm able to listen and able to deliver. If I can't deliver, then it's about finding somewhere. So again, see the question now because it's gone out to my head.
It was about what you look for in a community, what you look for in a safe space, if you like, before you join it.
As I just said, it's just making sure that I do my research before I ever signpost families, before I even put myself there, because some people say they can do something, but it doesn't mean that they can. And that's how I do it.
I understand.
Google search.
Nanny, how about you?
I look for organisations that listen to the community. So if I'm seeing puzzle pieces, and with autism, it's not about the language or the puzzle piece, it is the signal that they have not been listening. And they haven't been paying attention. And they think that their voice is stronger than ours is, which when you're supporting somebody, the person who is being supported should be the person who has the strongest voice on how they want to declare their identity and how they want their identity represented. I also look for gold washing. It's becoming quite a popular thing, and we're coming into April where there will be a huge amount of gold washing. Organisations who will turn up for 1 month and go, yay, autistics, and in May go, bye, autistics. And so we watch for 12 months of good faith and honest behaviour, rather than a performative, this makes a good tweet for April item.
Thank you. So last question as we come to the end. Stuart has asked, panel members have described the sense of being in a cultural battle, which is exhausting. Where do you get your own support to keep going? So, well, you touched on it, Vanessa, when you talked about faith. Is that part of your support
I would
system?
say that's part of it, but my other part is when I do my support groups, and I'm always told off that I need to slow down. But I think if I didn't have the safe spaces where I host a lot of the activities, especially in the school holidays, I wouldn't get an outlet, because I feel that's where I feel accepted, I'm heard. Like I said to everybody today, being here, I felt normal, whatever that word means, because everybody was saying something that I understood. But if you went other places, you're looked at stupid, you need to shut up. Here, you could hear everything that when a parent comes to me, it was like I was ticking the boxes. It wasn't ticking the box. I was ticking to say, yes, I understand, so I can go back into my community and say, look, these are new areas that you need to understand. Because again, when you're in the grassroots, sometimes organisations are not coming outside of their comfort zone because they don't trust what is out there. Most things are not evidence-based. It's just communities coming together. I believe in evidence-based. What is out there? Again, I've always followed spectred gaming from my son's perspective. So it's about me just moving away and just going somewhere so now I can go back to my space and say, I've got to look at a new chapter in my life and not just stay stagnated. Because some parents just stay in one space, but you need to open a new door to go into the next chapter of your life. And I think that's what I'm going to take away from today.
Thank you very much. And Nanny, should we just finish with you? How do you keep going in what feels like a battle?
Well, I mean, I go in a lot of autistic spaces. I also look at how far the gay community's come. I'm old enough to know, to be where it wasn't a thing that was discussed. Or if it was a joke, it was the butt of a joke. It's, oh, look at him. And that was considered acceptable when I was growing up. And now we've got to the point where, that is not. It is not okay. And it's not 100% safe yet, even for the gay community. But we've moved. And if we can move in the gay community, I feel the autistic community has the opportunity to gain the same understanding and acceptance. And, hanging out, I spend a lot of time on online autistic communities and with Spectrum Gaming, and we look at where we do, every win. We count every win, we measure every win, and every little win, you go, yes, for that win, it's worth it. It's worth keeping going.
Thank you very much. So it just remains me to thank all our contributors for a really rich discussion from a range of different perspectives. Thank you so much for the insights you've shared, and shall we thank all the panel members for their insights.